Hi, welcome to Tamit. My name is Kim, and tonight we welcome Cyrus Cummings, who is the Client Care Coordinator with Runway Recovery. He's going to share with us tonight a bit about his journey and how his family was impacted and how he has repaired those relationships. Cyrus, if you are ready, I will give you the floor.
I'm ready. Thank you for having me, first of all. When Lisa had approached me with this, I'm very hesitant to get on camera and talk to people, especially when it's not, over camera and not face to face. But I feel like the relationship I have with my mom now and coming from the relationship I did have with my mom and my family as a whole is something that like I can't deny the story of. So to start, um, I was born in San Diego. Both my parents were they were around, and they tried they tried as much as they could. A lot of moms, I feel, a lot of parents in general blame themselves for what their children have to go through, and I know it was no different with my mom. But growing up, I can always remember like it had nothing to do with my mom. All my mom ever did was she showed me as much love as she could, and it wasn't perfect. And that's how parenting is. I'm the firstborn in my family. I have two siblings, so my mom always said I was the experiment child. But we know about addiction is it starts long before I ever touched drugs and alcohol. Um, I remember for me, I noticed, and my parents noticed a shift when I was around nine. Around nine is when I started pushing against the religion that they had for me. And it started with behaviors. They noticed I was a lot more deviant, a lot more willing to argue and aggressive. And I could see how it took a toll on my parents, even from nine. Like I always worried about things that shouldn't have worried about. And as much as I saw what my mom was going through and how it affected her, I cared. I always cared. I always saw my mom cry, and I never wanted my mom to cry. My mom crying was the last thing I ever wanted to see, especially when I knew that I had a part to play in it. But for some reason, every behavior that made her cry, no matter how bad I felt, it was it never really mattered. I would sit there and think I'm never going to make my mom feel this way again. And 15, 20 minutes later, that all that all went out the window, and I knew exactly what I was doing each time. Every time I manipulated my mom into whatever it was. Like I was smart enough to know what I was doing. I was smart enough to know how it made her feel, but it was just I couldn't get out of it. It is a cycle of addiction long before you touch drugs and alcohol. And then I'd say I had my first drink at around 13, and that's where that's where it had started for me with active drug addiction. And it didn't escalate immediately. It took some time. I went from drinking here or there, still doing everything my parents didn't want me to do. They were there for me as much as they could. All my parents, like I said, all my parents ever did. My mom very specifically was she tried to show me love, and in every way she could, she tried to make the best decision, and she made it clear to me. She was like, I don't know if this is the right decision, but this is what we're going to do. And I never respected it. It was all about what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, and how I wanted to do it. And throughout the age of 13 to 19, I kept everything hidden from my parents in terms of my active drug use. But my parents always knew what was what was happening. They saw physical symptoms. They saw my behaviors as bad as they were initially. They saw it progressively get worse. They saw the way I treated my siblings. They saw the way I treated them, the way I treated myself too, because I have a long history of like mental health disorders. I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety, depression. It's almost everything under the mental health umbrella is what I had been diagnosed with. But they had seen one of the things I used to do was I used to cut myself, and I always had that from my parents too. And I've once I started slipping up a little bit in my eyes, where they started to become more confused as to what I was doing, I could deflect it away from my addiction and more towards my mental health. So, and I knew exactly what I was doing. Like I said, I knew that if I got my mom upset enough about another topic away from my addiction, away from how much weight I was gaining, away from how I was throwing up all the time, away from how my eyes were turning yellow, that I could keep doing what I was doing as long as I stayed out of the house, kept them in the dark, and when they started to figure out what was going on, I deflected as quickly as possible. That went on till I was 19, and like I said, I was out of the house all the time. I was the one person in my friend group that was struggling with addiction. I have a lot of really good friends down home in San Diego, and they would talk to me sometimes about like, hey, we don't think this is good for you. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. I think maybe I just have a problem with it, but I'm depressed and this is how I use my medicine. And they were like, okay, well, if you don't think you're addicted to it, then okay. And I knew every single time that exactly what it was. I knew I had a problem. I knew that it was my mental health, but it was more severe than that. I was using drugs and alcohol to cure symptoms that otherwise seemed incurable. And those friends eventually, it got bad enough to the point where they sat down with my family, and I wasn't there, but from the stories they told me, that they sat my parents down and said, look, Cyrus is an alcoholic and an addict. We've talked to him about it, and he doesn't seem receptive. And I wasn't. I just wanted whatever I could do to keep using whoever I hurt, however bad I hurt them. None of it matters. I remember a handful of times actually becoming physical with my mom, um, which is one of the things I think I know I regret most, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to her. But that's the point it got to for me. My mom always saw the good kid in her son, and I know she had thought that she had lost that later down the line, because even though she didn't see my using, she saw how just mentally absent I was, how I could be there physically with them, but I would argue all the time. Every little thing they told me, if they told me that I was going to have eggs for breakfast, I'd fight them on it because it was just something to argue with them about. And I was so angry with myself for the things I had been doing behind closed doors and the way I was acting, but could never reach out for help. I know there were countless times where I'd be in such a bad spot and I'd ask to talk to my mom, and I was going to tell her that I needed help, and she would sit down with me and she'd say, what's wrong, what's going on, and I just couldn't get it out of my mouth. I Nothing mattered. I wanted more than anything. I wanted to change, but I physically could not. My addiction had such a firm grip on me; it wouldn't allow me. And my mom started, I think, thought that she had lost the child that was so loving at one point and was so happy. And so they sat down with my parents, and I don't know exactly how the conversation went, but the next day I was getting ready to go to a friend's house, and both of my parents sat me down and said, "Okay, like, how much have you really been drinking? What do you really do when you go out?" And my first reaction in my head was, "Okay, how little can I lie? How much can I lie? How much of the truth can I tell? How little of the truth can I tell to get away with them believing the lie that I'm telling? Give them enough to be concerned, but not enough to cut my active addiction and to where it was." And I mean, I didn't know they knew anything about this, so I lied. I was like, "Oh no, I've been, I just smoke a little weed. I drink, I drink at the house with you guys sometimes when you guys allow it. But other than that, it's just infrequently." And they're like, "Okay, why are your cheeks so red? Why are you throwing up all the time?" And I had the brilliant idea, because I was into working out and new supplements, that I would tell them it was an excess of vitamin B, because vitamin B can cause some similar symptoms to that. They're like, "No, we know we know what you've been doing." And they called my friends in who had seen it all. I sat down and I cried with them, because I knew, I could see it in their eyes. It was the hardest thing for them to do. I can't imagine, like, having to sit, your son down, talk to them about that. But I had made the decision there. I was like, okay, I had known that this was uncontrollable. I had known that I was hurting my parents and didn't know how to stop it. I sat down. I was like, okay, I know I need to do something. And so my parents got on the phone with Veggie. I was at Runway in a day. Came here, and I was just so excited about sobriety and getting my life on track. And I committed to a treatment program, and throughout the whole time, I was so desired to be intertwined with my parents, because one thing I remember is, no matter how far I pushed my parents away, it was an oxymoron of wanting to keep them at arm's distance, but no further than that. If they were at arm's distance and I could get help from them when I needed help, when I could convince them that we can have a drink on the weekends as a family, but after that I'm not talking to them, then I was okay. I could keep them just at arm's distance, to the point where I could reach out, pull them in when I wanted them there, and push them out. So I was really, really intertwined with my parents, and that was a big adjustment for both of us, because the program I went through was in Costa Mesa, and I was from in San Diego. I'd had a few friends who had struggled with more mental health than addiction, and I wanted to go to a program local in San Diego so I didn't have to be away from my family, because I'd finally was like, okay, I want to be the kid that I wanted to give to my parents. Um, they got on the phone with the program, with the outreach director, and he spent hours on the phone with my parents. Just like, this is where he needs to be. This is what will be best for him. And they sat me down, and I agreed to it. And after completing the program and abstaining from drugs and alcohol, setting some boundaries with my parents, I can say I have the healthiest relationship with my parents that I've ever had since before I was 9. Um, One of the things my family wanted to do before I went to treatment was they wanted us all to move to Texas. And in my active addiction, I thought it would be a good idea to go, because I knew I needed help. I didn't know how to do it, and I was too prideful to go ask for it. So I thought the best way to do it was to go move out of state and see if I could get a fresh start. I went to treatment, and My family recently committed to that move to Texas, and I stayed here. And one of the things my mom told me is we're all hugging them, saying goodbye, and she said, "I'm so happy that I can leave my son and not have to worry about him waking up tomorrow or what he's doing when he goes out at night." And that's the relationship I have with my mom now, is that she knows that that Cyrus that was 9 was never lost. Addiction takes over us, but we're still the same people inside. And I was fortunate enough to find who that was again and be able to show my parents. I worked through the 12 steps, and when it came time to make amends to my mom, I'd given it some time, because for the longest time, even though I wasn't using drugs, I still would go home and I was difficult. Um, but I remember coming to my mom and making those amends to her. I said, like, Mom, I know the things I've done to you. I know that you only ever tried to do what was good for me. And I was constantly defiant of you. I lied to you. I kept you up late nights wondering where your son was. Is he going to make it home tonight? Is he going to come home and he's going to be injured? And I want to know what I can do to make that right with you. And she just cried and hugged me and said, please just keep doing what you're doing. I just want you to keep doing what you're doing. And the progression of both of those, my mom, I know it was hard on my mom to see that, to have her son move away for treatment for a substantial amount of time, and then completing treatment and saying, like, Mom, I think it would be a good idea for me to stay out here. But it was through all of those difficult things, the hard conversations, the having to let go of the codependent relationship with my mom, where I didn't call her every 30 minutes when something came up, but I was like, I told her, like, I love you and I want to talk to you, but I need to grow. And the response that she gave me, she cried, because I know it's obviously hard, but like I said, because it was so difficult for her, that she also grew as well. Because I mean, I have no words to describe the love that I've always had for my mom, and the knowing how bad I was hurting her, like I was saying, and just being completely unable to stop doing what I was doing, but wanting nothing more than to stop. And I knew what I was doing every time. Like I said, I knew how bad it would hurt her. I could see it. My mom wears her heart on her sleeve. She doesn't get angry. She doesn't she doesn't yell at me. She just breaks down. And every time I saw my mom break down, it would break me inside a little bit. And that, I remember, that was more of a reason for me to go out and use the next time, because I was such a I was such a poor son. So I have to drown out these feelings. But the I call my mom every day now on the phone. I called her the other day, told her I wasn't going to be able to do this interview, and she was like, I was having a really rough day being away from everyone, but like, I'm really glad you got the opportunity to do that. So hopefully she gets to see this on YouTube in a few days. But that's all I really have for now.
Cyrus, what an amazing story, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us. Um, are you up for some questions from our moms if they have some?
Absolutely,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, because I'm here, I get to start first. So I really clicked on what you said about your addiction to drugs and alcohol starting before you actually even picked up drugs or
Mhm.
alcohol. Do you think that's true pretty much for everybody?
Um, I I can speak for myself and for a lot of the people close to me that when I really going back and looking through my life and the people around me, I can say yes, that is true. It starts with, for me, one of the big things it started with was like relationships with women. I noticed that my tendency to grasp on and forget everything else that I wanted, that I all my goals, that all went out the window. And every situation is different, obviously, but I do in general would say that addiction, being an addict, is a series of character traits that we have. And like I said, drugs and alcohol are not our problem. It's a very poor solution to a problem that we have internally.
Right. Thank you for that. Sue asks, I'd like to ask about the cutting. My child did that before she began using, and I don't know that I've ever equated them. Did you find that the more you used, the less you cut? And if not, how did you stop that?
For me, they went synergistically with each other. The more I learned about what cutting is and what addiction is, the more I find that they're intertwined with each other. For me, cutting was a way of escaping my emotional pain and turning it into physical pain. That's kind of how one of the options I was given to me is like, why do you think you do this? And I was like, I click with that, and it's the same method of trying to escape what I'm feeling through any means necessary. And I wouldn't say that it lessened with my drug use. I would say that they were, if I couldn't drink or if I couldn't get a pill or if I couldn't find something to smoke, then I would go to the bathroom. I'd cut my chest and I'd throw in a tank top so nobody would ever know.
Cami asks, my daughter started cutting as a freshman in high school, and then came the anorexia. And hearing your story now makes me think this was the beginning of her downfall.
Mm. I think mental health, I'd say cutting is often referred in terms of very specifically mental health. Um, but like I said, I think it's all the same thing. You find something that clicks. That's what people's drug of choice is. Um, it just clicked with you. It has nothing to do with you're lesser than, you're greater than, alcohol abuse. If you go and abuse fentanyl, at the end of the day, we have a disease. And I think to say it was the start of a downfall may be true for me. I started cutting before I was in addiction, and that I'd say that might have been my first escape.
Hmm, an escape. Um, yeah, let's see what else we've got here. Sharon says, so after you got sober, did it take going through all the steps before your relationship changed with your mom? Was that codependency hard to break after getting sober?
The codependency was one of the harder things to break in sobriety because, like I said, I had wanted to be that good son for so long, and I thought that it was simply drinking and doing drugs that was the reason that I was like this. And so when I got sober, I wanted to just be all around my mom. I wanted to show her that like I can be so good now that I'm not using. But breaking the codependency was really, really, really hard. And because of it being hard, and because of talking with my clinicians in treatment and getting recommendations from them of how I should approach boundaries with my mom, and if she's not receptive, what do I do? Or if do I know this is right? but I'm unwilling to do it, which is the same thing I'd been doing throughout my active addiction. It was through those that I broke the codependent, not broke the codependent relationship, but formed an interdependent relationship with my mom where I can function without her, she can function without me. And when we get together and when I go visit my family, I don't make my mom cry anymore. The only time I see my mom cry now is when she's happy to see me, or when she's just proud. I wouldn't say it took all 12 steps to work, but for me, I could say that um, I really struggled with some resentments towards my parents as well. And so working through those resentments towards myself as well. Like I said, like I'd got physical with my mom a few times, and that was like broke me because that is the last thing I ever wanted to do towards somebody who loved me as much as my mom did. And so working through that resentment with myself, working through resentments with some of the things that my mom tried her best to do and I couldn't understand why. It didn't make sense to me. It was working through those resentments that I was able to develop the actual genuine connection I have with my mom now.
Sue says, I'm so glad to hear that your relationship with your mom has come back to a healthy place. That's a hope we all wish for, that our child comes around to being the kind humans that we know they are. Is there something you'd advise moms in the area of us keeping boundaries with our using child?
So what worked with my family and what's worked with me with people I consider family, like I have really good friends that go out and use and see them in active addiction. My parents did with me is they were in communication with my clinicians. And so my therapist, you can sign ROIs so that, you know, the people who are treating your son or daughter and are closest to the situation can recommend ways that you can approach the situation. Because it happened, everybody knows how it is. Like we can only try our best. And I know my parents never would have ever expected that their son not only didn't want to participate in their religion, but then needed to go to drug and alcohol treatment and move away. So they had no idea how to handle any situation. They could just try. But then they got in contact with people who had seen the situation before. They sat down with my family and talked to them and talked to me about my relationship with my parents. And they could give a clinical perspective on how to set boundaries and what those boundaries should be. And it was just a matter of being willing to do them for me and for my parents.
That's awesome. So, I just wanted to say you remind me a lot of my own son in that um, how little can I lie and how much can I lie and still get them to think, oh, yeah, it's okay. So I really appreciated hearing that because it makes me think, oh, not totally crazy after all. Um, so any other questions? Let's see what we've got here. Karen says, I'm so proud of you, Cyrus. Everything you say sounds exactly like my son. He is 24. This is his seventh time in rehab. He's 60 days clean, yay, and doing the best he ever has. I got on a little bit late. Was this your first rehab?
This was my first time in treatment, and I know every time going back to treatment, there's more shame involved in it for people who go through it. From the outside looking in, a lot of people say like it takes so much strength to go back in there, but in the moment, it's really hard to go back to treatment. And I'm fortunate enough to the point where not only did I have enough great people around me to support me, I mean, that's really everything I have, I credit to the people around me, because the connection that I made, the support that I received, the belief in myself when I didn't believe in me personally, is the only reason I've ever gained anything.
Sue says, thank you for sharing with us tonight, Cyrus. This really brings hope, and we are in need of massive amounts of hope.
Yeah.
So we want to thank you for coming in tonight and for sharing your story with us here at the Addicts Mom. We wish everyone a good evening. Thanks for coming in, Cyrus.
Thank you. Thank you.